Yeah, it's not been the worst of days. I think we were making progress. We're obviously quite far off in P1. It was a lot further than normal. And first lap felt pretty decent getting back, but then it's been a bit of a challenge from then. And we made some progress over lunch, so I think we progressed, but still quite a chunk off, so we've got some work to do overnight.
You weren't the only one to spin out there, so a lot of people had issues. What caused that? What was going on at the time?
I think the first one was just pushing too much. I think we ultimately also ride quality is not where we want it. So the car's quite unpredictable. The second one, I touched the grass and had a snap, and that was that. It's, pushing, which is positive, I guess. Hopefully no more.
The McLarens look very quick around here. So where do you think you're fighting tomorrow? Where do you think you'll be able to get up to qualifying?
Well, I think before my spin, I think I was around a 10th up, and then I've got another 10th and a half in the last corner. So I've got to make some improvements there, and I think then we've got some work to do with the setup. So I think we're where we're pace-wise for some reason where we are. I don't really know whether we're going to find 8/10ths. I really don't know, but we'll try our best.
Can a 7-times world champion reinvent himself in the middle of Ferrari's technical chaos? What Hamilton said after practices in the Netherlands gives us a track, but not the complete answer. After the practices in Zandvoort, Hamilton got out of the SF25 with a serious face, the firm look but loaded with a difficult tension to hide. The British pilot did not reserve when talking to the press. He acknowledged that the car is unpredictable, which still does not find full confidence to attack the curves naturally, and that the extreme configurations that Ferrari is forced to implement are pushing him to an awkward limit. On 2 occasions he lost control of the car during the sessions, a symptom not only of his struggle with the machinery, but of his will to seek the limit still at the expense of the error. This frustration is not only technical, it is also existential. Hamilton is not any pilot in a difficult season. He is a 7-time world champion who has left Mercedes' security to challenge himself and rebuild a legendary team. He does not seek to add podiums, seek to leave a legacy. And when the car does not respond, the blow is not only to the stopwatch, it is the purpose that keeps it on the grill. However, even in that uncertainty environment, a latent force is perceived. Hamilton spoke with determination, making it clear that it is not about resignation but reconstruction. He mentioned summer break as a point of personal and professional restart, where, beyond the figures, he has tried to reconnect with his competitive essence. In his words, there is an almost confessional tone. He did not underestimate the challenge of adapting to Ferrari, but he did believe that the transition would be faster. That talent would suffice to compensate for problems. Now he knows no. And that knowledge, although bitter, may be your best weapon. Because Hamilton is not fleeing this storm. It is inside it, trying to understand its logic, waiting for the moment when the car and the pilot finally align. Each practice, each error, every spin in Zandvoort is a lesson. And if something has demonstrated in more than a decade to the highest level, it knows how to learn. Maybe he is not winning races now, but he is building something more important. A redemption narrative that, if he culminates successfully, could be the most significant chapter of his entire career. The numbers are cold, direct, and often ruthless. They have no emotional memory, they do not understand contexts or sacrifices. They simply reflect what has happened. And in the case of Lewis Hamilton during this 2025 season, the numbers tell an uncomfortable story for a pilot who has built his career about greatness. After 14 great awards, Hamilton has added 109 points. A respectable figure if it was a pilot in the initial learning or adaptation stage, but deeply disappointing when it comes to a 7-times world champion piloting for the most legendary rack of motoring. It occupies the 6th position in the championship, far from the leaders and even more significant, without a single podium in main races. Not even a 3rd place that could offer a symbol of palpable hope. His only victory, ironically, came in an alternative format, the sprint race of the China Grand Prix. It was a brilliant action, yes, but also an anomaly in the middle of an irregular performance sea. However, there is a trend that deserves to stand out. In the second half of the championship, this classification difference has been drastically reduced to only 0.078 seconds. That is no accident. It reflects a progressive adaptation, an increasingly fine reading of the behavior of the SF25, and a real evolution in its piloting. It is an indication that Hamilton is beginning to synchronize with the car, even when this is not yet up to its demands. In the practices of the Netherlands GP, this evolution took visible form. In the FP2, Hamilton was 6th, to plus 0.848 seconds of leader Lando Norris. But that time was achieved with tires damaged by previous rotation. Despite that disadvantage, it was faster than Leclerc, which ended 8th and only 1/10 slower, which suggests that, if not mediating the error, Hamilton could have climbed even more positions. Those details, imperceptible for those who only read the timetable, tell a different story, that of a pilot who is on the edge of performance, still at a technical disadvantage but begins to emerge. The FP1 was more gloomy, 15 for Hamilton, 14 for Leclerc. Both suffering with a car that finds no consistency in technical circuits such as Zandvoort. But even in the midst of that technical mediocrity, Hamilton begins to win silent battles. They are not glorious victories or celebrations on the podium. They are strategic conquests. Overcome their partner, minimize damage, find performance windows in an unstable car. This deep reading of the numbers does not intend to sweeten reality. The balance is hard without a doubt. But he also suggests that Hamilton is not stagnant, either mentally or technically. It is building, stone by stone, a recovery that will not be instantaneous, but that could be irreversible if the trend is maintained. And when a champion begins to close the gap, even from a position of weakness, the rest of the grill should start worrying. In Ferrari's modern history, few cars have generated as much division within the team as SF25. Presented as a total reinvention regarding its predecessor, this car should not only break with the limitations of the past, but catapult the team to a new era of sustained competitiveness. But what seemed on paper seemed a logical and even ambitious evolution. On the track it has proven to be a machine with a fractured, unpredictable, and deeply contradictory personality. The SF25 is a temperamental car. Its greatest technical defect lies in its inability to run consistently close to the ground, a fundamental condition to maximize the soil effect that defines this era of Formula One. While other equipment can maximize Venturi tunnels and diffusers, Ferrari is forced to compromise its height to avoid rebounding and loss of stability in rapid curves. This limitation has a domino effect. Less aerodynamic load from the ground implies greater dependence on aggressive wings, which in turn generates more drag and penalizes the peak speed. It is a delicate balance that Ferrari has failed to solve completely, even with the multiple updates introduced in the last races. Charles Leclerc summarized it brutally honestly: they have had to configure the car in extreme shapes just to make it competitive. And that has led to him and Hamilton to overpilot, to look for the limit desperately, and therefore to make unusual mistakes for two talents of that magnitude. Tromps, track exits, limo blockages, control losses that we rarely saw in Ferrari 2 years ago, have become common currency. However, not everything is negative. As the season advanced, some of the updates introduced began to bear fruit. The car does not require such radical configurations, and although the operational window is still narrow, at least it allows engineers to work with a slightly more reasonable margin. That was noticed in Zandvoort, where the general performance of the SF25 was more stable, although not exempt from problems. The 2 rotations of Hamilton in free practice were not casual. They reveal that the car continues to have an unpredictable behavior to the limit, especially when it is subjected to fast curve sequences with wavy asphalt, as is the case of the Dutch layout. In essence, SF25 is a car with 2 faces. In ideal conditions and with the right setup, it can be competitive, even fast. But as soon as you get out of that narrow comfort window, it becomes a treacherous machine, capable of getting the worst of its pilots. And that, in a calendar as diverse and aggressive as that of 2025, represents a structural problem. For Hamilton, this technical scenario is doubly complex. It is still adapting to Ferrari's philosophy, its development tools, to the way the team interprets the data. But in addition, it must do it in a car that does not forgive mistakes and that demands a pilot calculated to the millimeter. It is not that the SF25 is slow. It is inconsistent. And in Formula One, inconsistency is worse than mediocrity because it generates doubts. In the pilots, in engineers, in the strategy, throughout. Zandvoort marked a turning point. Not because Hamilton has led the timetable or left his rivals unanswered, but because, for the first time in many weeks, his presence within the SF25 transmitted another energy. What was previously a visible battle to understand a hostile car, now it seemed a more refined dance between the pilot and the machine. In each lap, even with errors such as rotations, less anxiety and more method were perceived. Its piloting was no longer reactive but calculated. I was pushing, yes, but with a clear direction. It was not a blind fight. It was an exploration. His post-practical speech reflected this evolution. Far from the frustrated and resigned tone he had used in other calendar quotes, his words were loaded with self-consciousness. He admitted that the path of adaptation has been longer and longer than he expected, that had underestimated the magnitude of change, that he thought perhaps that his experience and talent would be enough to stop the learning curve. But that honesty did not come with complaints. Wine with resolution, with a mature acceptance of the situation. And that acceptance in champions of this size is usually the starting point for what comes next. Because if something defines Hamilton, it is not just his skill at the wheel. It is your mental resilience. Throughout his career, he has demonstrated again and again that he is able to get up stronger after each stumble. From the youthful errors in McLaren, through the internal controversies in Mercedes, to the infarction duels with Rosberg and Verstappen, its history is woven at times when it seemed to be against the strings. Just and then respond with devastating force. In this new stage with Ferrari, its goal is not simply to win a race. It is transforming a narrative. Convert a season of doubts into a base for an era of success. And although the results do not still reflect it, their attitude, their language, and their approach have already begun to change. That, in the volatile ecosystem of Formula One, is much more important than an isolated podium. Because when a pilot like Hamilton recovers his center, his clarity of purpose, the results are usually a matter of time. Do you think Hamilton can reverse this narrative and take Ferrari back to the top? Or do you think that its competitive cycle has already reached its maximum point and that this movement has been more symbolic than functional? Leave it in the comments.